All right, so when we've gone about doing our work, okay, good, it's working. For us, there seem to be some persistent themes around being and doing. So in healthcare for us, we do a lot of transacting, we do a lot of doing, right? We're doing stuff to people, and we're doing tests, and we're having office visits. We feel like we focus a lot on the technical and the structural, electronic health records, quality measures, you know, the kind of requirements of advanced primary care, all of these things we've got to do. Less time, though, on the being side of things, the cultural, the relational, the connecting piece. So the first innovation that we developed that I'm going to talk about is really in that lane, which is also about the patient-clinician relationship. It is uniquely suited to primary care, but we've done this work in many different settings. And then I'm going to talk about the second innovation we're doing in communities that begins to build more of a through thread from being into doing. You know what? Okay, here we go. Got it. So Third Conversation is a program we're going to talk about. Now, unfortunately, the video that I'm going to show you doesn't work. The audio doesn't work for some reason, so I'm going to do it on my laptop here in a second. But this is an initiative that we started creating about 4 years ago, researching it. We do a lot of human-centered design. We use methods like appreciative inquiry and strategic doing. You guys will know a lot about those. And we were really thinking about, actually, so a lot of you will know Andrew Moore-Singer. He's a physician, primary care physician. He came to us and was like, hey, there's this whole thing called burnout and, you know, joy in work, and do you think patients actually care? And we said, this could go both ways. One could be, we all had to learn how to use a computer. You make 6 figures, shut up and go back to work. Or we could really tap into people's core humanity. I'm worried about you as a human. So we thought, well, what would happen if we actually got patients and clinicians in a room together to get real, pre-pandemic, we do this virtually now, and it still works, shockingly, and invited them to just have a conversation about what does it feel like as a human to get care in the system or to deliver care in the system. We then later realized people were really overlooking the relationship between clinicians and their leadership, the C-suite, the administrators. Almost no one looks at the administrators as human anymore, right? We come into the office and we're like, okay, I got my list of demands, and I'm going to start finger pointing right now. You know, so we developed a second program for that. So here is the video that won't play. I'm going to just show you 90 seconds of it. It's going to start with Andrew Moore-Singer, and hopefully it gives you a feeling for what some of this work is like.
I'd say 3C is the story of a bunch of people who were concerned that the existing healthcare system, especially our primary care delivery system, isn't working for patients and it's not working for practitioners. And we thought, what would happen if those people actually sat down and had a conversation together?
We realized that the human toll that the system is taking on patients is also having a disproportionate impact on clinicians. And we thought to ourselves, has anybody ever brought these two conversations together? That's why we call it the Third Conversation. We were hearing the conversation at the national level about clinician well-being and burnout. When we began to look deeper, what we learned was really stunning. We started to see that, half of clinicians are screening positive for depression. We learned that almost 10% have suicidal thoughts. These are the individuals who we are asking to heal, and they are having just as hard of a time.
When we were envisioning what this might look like and feel like, I think we expected people to talk about what was wrong. We expected people to talk about what they wanted from the system. I think we were really surprised, though, how therapeutic those conversations would become for both participants. It was really surprising for us.
I think Third Conversation is unique because it's grounded in that purpose and in that empathy, that bi-directional empathy. So I think, unlike other initiatives, Third Conversation is a platform for building community in service of a better system.
Okay, so more on the website if you guys want to finish watching that video. This work has been really profoundly interesting. So we've done this in more than 20 different communities, 9 different states. Again, a mix of the patient-clinician events, which we call Spark events, and the clinician administrator events, which we call Ignite events. So really sparking a different mindset for both patients and clinicians. Clinicians tell us, this really helps me understand my patients in a different way, like it makes sense of those patient experience surveys. But they're unpacking like assumptions that they've been making. We had one woman we did an event in Sutter, Northern California, at Lakeside, and she said, she's a physician, she stood up and she said, oh my God, I thought patients were hiding things from me. All these years, I thought they were hiding things. Now what I understand is I'm coming in, I'm usually late, I've got, maybe 15, 18 minutes with you, you're filtering. I didn't understand that before now. And so, and same thing, patients are like, oh, I didn't realize that when you prescribed that medicine to me, you didn't actually know how much it cost. And I've been really pissed about that because this is the impact it had on me, right? And so lots of really kind of tricky dynamics. But more importantly, so let me break down, what happens is these guys come out of this process, so it's a 3-hour event if we do it in person, 2.5 hours online. And they really have a renewed sense and idea that, oh my God, we're actually, not only we're in this together, we actually want the same things from our healthcare system. And that is a profound realization for most of these individuals. So we start by really helping people deepen that human connection. They do some work in pairs, one patient, one clinician, or administrator and clinician, and they're really getting to know each other as people. We're using a lot of appreciative inquiry, understanding what were some of the MVP moments in healthcare, how did relationships factor into those things. We are looking for those moments where we create an empathy bridge. And the science of empathy tells us that when we can create that like aha moment where somebody goes, oh my God, I finally get what your life is like, it also almost always creates a desire in that person to want to help solve the problem, right? And that's a really important mindset shift. We help people dreamstorm together. What do they want the ideal system to be like? So not brainstorm, but dreamstorm. We're really trying to move people into a deeper part of themselves that is more human connected. And what we know is that has really interesting, important impacts on the individuals who participate in just this one experience. Individually, they change how they show up in the world. They change how they connect with colleagues. This is what they're telling us in our evaluation data anyway. They change how they prepare for office visits if they're a patient. They want to help each other. And so there's, I think, some doorway here into collective action, but there's a minimum, a real impact on the individuals. I just love some of these quotes that we have from events. How many times we've heard a patient stand up and say, well, my PCP is like my family, or they have become part of my family. It's really been awesome. So in our evaluations, the bottom line of this slide, you can read it as faster than I can actually speak it, is people feel good when they're done, when they leave this event. And you don't leave with an action item, right? That's huge. They didn't come to do anything. They just got to be together, and that's big. And our clinicians are saying that this really can help with burnout. It really does reconnect them to purpose and meaning. And also when we talk about our night events, we've done fewer of those, but so far we're working on doing more. But in those events, they start to have interesting conversations between the C-suite and the clinicians around how decisions are made. We were working in Pennsylvania, in Rochester, New York, and the CEO and the CFO participated in the event. And the CFO said, I never get the opportunity to hear about how our financial decisions impact our frontline clinicians. This has been so helpful, and I'm going to create new avenues that help me really get that feedback and get understanding. And the CEO stood up and said, actually, we have this model where the 8 of us on the leadership team, we make the decisions and we hand down the edict. I'm not going to do that anymore. That's not how a modern organization should work. We have to do this differently. And by, on the flip side, the clinicians were standing up and saying, okay, look, I didn't realize you were human. Like, I'm sorry. I'm coming into this office, like, trying to, kill you in some way. and I've got to reset and understand what your world is like. And I'm now committed to be a more productive part of your world, which I think was amazing. So I'm going to let this video also will not play. However, I do want you to hear it because this is a physician from Mississippi. We're right now doing a deep dive in Mississippi and in Georgia with 2 institutions there, and it's been really great work.
all of these patients had a sincere appreciation for the healthcare system, but they genuinely said thank you. I don't know, with the sincerity that was just like overwhelming to hear thank you. And I think it is for folks who are forgetting why they do what they do, right? I think it is a great opportunity to be reminded that the work is hard and the days are long, but it's so worth it. A lot of the stuff that we do is just hard and heavy, and you don't really understand the weight of it. And so it was nice to be able to hear my colleagues and know that there is not just this sort of Shannon stuff that I need to deal with, that my colleagues are also pressing forward and giving phenomenal care to folks, but struggling in some ways. It was just sort of this appreciation that I'm not by myself.
Ask me who Chad Crouch is. Anyway, so we started thinking and realizing we're kind of onto something here. What our evaluation data, we worked with an external evaluator, and what they're showing us is that this program has helped create what I would call the conditions for change in these institutions. People show up differently at work and they want to do different things. They want to work differently together, and they're willing to roll up their sleeves, which is really, really cool. So we started thinking about, okay, how do we take what we've learned from this type of being work and bolt on kind of like a doing piece of it. And it's a weird time to be trying to do change work in the world with the pandemic and the divisiveness, et cetera. And so we started to think about a couple things. So the pandemic, sucks. We all know that. And it's created new ways of working in the world in so many different sectors. It unlocked like a rapid capacity for change where we used to take, 9 months or 2 years to make policy and regulatory changes. We did them, virtually overnight, right? So we were like, can we capitalize on that? But we're also thinking about just the divisiveness that has, pervades pretty much every, part of our world. And we were thinking about the fact that communities have a lot more assets than they realize. They're often not coordinated and understood well. So what could we do to kind of put these being and doing components together? We created something called Community Rocket. Rocket stands for the Resource Organizer for Communities Kit, and it is a community-powered problem-solving model designed for local elected officials. So why local elected officials as opposed to members of Congress or whatever? You guys know you can get elected to Congress if you're a really good fundraiser and you have some subject matter expertise, but the leadership can be very performative. At the local level, you can't do just that. You have to actually have relationships. You have to build relationships. Not everybody, of course, is like that, but by and large, when you look at particularly county level individuals, they are more relational. And so we've been working, we're currently funded to work exclusively in the state of Oregon to do this work. And there's something else interesting kind of occurred to us last year, or I guess, 2 years ago, 2020. So not only was it pandemic time, but it was actually the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 13 mission. And that's how we got the name Rocket, because we started thinking about the story of Apollo 13, which that they have this major explosion on board and they've got to figure out how to fix it, but they can only use like literally what they have in the space capsule. How they did that was super, inventive and ingenious. They were like using gym socks and duct tape for air filters, right? So we're like, all right, how can we do this in a community? So we built Rocket around the core principles that you'll see here, but really I'm just going to tell you 2 stories that I think will exemplify what the process looks like. Operationally, it's basically a series of planning meetings and then 3 workshops. We have totally taken the rocket analogy too far, so our workshops are mission, launch, flight, and landing. Tillamook County, Oregon. Tillamook Creamery cheese, right? So delicious, everybody, mostly knows that. So Tillamook County is a really interesting community, and we're finding this about every community we work in, by the way. They have, so Tillamook Creamery actually had a big problem in the mid-1800s, which was all of the farmers and dairy workers, they needed to get their products to Portland, but it's a really long trip if you have to go through the mountainous terrain. They needed to figure out how to build a ship and sail there, but they're all competitors. So they said, well, we all have this common need. So what we're gonna do is look around us and we're gonna figure out what do we have on hand that can help us solve this problem. So they salvaged a shipwreck, they worked with local loggers for timber, they worked with a local Native American community, sourced canvas and rope, and they built a ship, and it was called the Morning Star. So they have this sort of asset-based mentality that is a big part of their history. So they came to us and said, we don't have a low barrier shelter, first of all. Low barrier shelter meaning a place for homeless people to go without identity requirements, documentation, or sobriety, things. So if you need a place to stay tonight, you can come here, no questions asked. They don't have that in the county. And as Portland has been closing their homeless camps, you guys probably read about that in the news, Tillamook County has been quite impacted by that. They now have the second highest rate of homelessness in the entire state of Oregon. So we've got to do something. So we helped them implement a rocket process, and what they did was they invited a lot of the kind of traditional stakeholders you would imagine, and also some non-traditional people like the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce, who had never thought about homelessness, but obviously businesses impacted, you have homeless individuals sleeping on your doorstep, et cetera. So we began this process of asset mapping. So this is what their asset board looked like at first. We went out and found a couple, that's the multi-coded ones. And then we worked with church leaders and businesses and lots of other folks. Creamery Association was represented as well, and said local employers, et cetera. Here's all the things that we've got that could possibly help us in relation to low barrier shelter. But they also said, well, there's also stuff here that doesn't even relate to low barrier shelter, but it could. And they've had this conversation on what are we good at? What do we have? And so at some point, the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce says, you know what? So we go through, and I'm going to spare you the detailed process of, we map the assets, but then we step back and we do some meaning making. And the Chamber of Commerce guy goes, we've got a lot of unused land in this county. And I see over here we've got Habitat for Humanity, and then over here there's like this program that is building, they're using prison inmates to build mobile trailers for the Department of Parks. What if we got them in a room? Like, could we come up with some cool, flexible, mobile, low barrier shelter, which will also address the issue of homelessness? People get a lot of NIMBY going on. They don't want their shelter located in their town, right? So this could move around. Like, what do we think about that? So they started to really look at and brainstorm ideas just based on what they already had on hand. And I'm going to just show you, if I can get the slide to advance, which I can't, where they ended up. So they came up with these 3 ideas. Here we go. This is the mobile flexible shelter piece. This is the services and supports, like a coordinated, both virtual and non-virtual, using public libraries, because they have a huge footprint, right, in many communities in their county. And then this is a continuum task force to really look at the whole issues of housing, period, because everybody's got rural housing issues. So, and then what we've done is, attach the assets to them. We use the strategic doing framework to create a set of actions that they can take in the first 60 days, and then 60 days and beyond. So they, long story short, came up with these amazing ideas. And then they went out and they told the state of Oregon about it, and they were selected as one of only 8 counties in the entire state to get over $1 million in funding, because the state said, you've done the hard work of getting the people in the room, developing and deepening relationships, and figuring out what your priorities are going to be. We want to support you. So I'll close with, briefly, Gillum County, Oregon. Very interesting and very different community than Tillamook. So Gillum County, Oregon only has 1,900 people in the entire county, but they have a ton of money because they are home to a landfill that Waste Management runs, which serves both Portland and Seattle. So you can imagine the size of that sucker. So they get a lot of fees from Waste Management to do that. They also have some wind and solar farms. So the county itself has money at its disposal, but they don't have any child care. So they have a 3-year wait. There are 1,900 people total in the county. They got a 3-year wait to get kids from 0 to 5 into any kind of child care. So we ran the process with them of asset mapping. What can we do? And the thing that they said, which was interesting, is they're like, well, we got a lot of families with homes. What can we do with that? And they're like, well, wait a minute, what if we did more home-based child care providers? And so they came up with some very cool, they actually came up with 7 different ideas, you can see them here, and ended up focusing on home-based childcare providers and the supply of childcare workers, and they're right in the middle of their rocket right now, so they're often working in their action cycle period. Again, deepening their relationships, working together, and combining their assets in a different way, but really learning that strengths-based, asset-based mindset as an antidote to divisiveness. So I'll just want to leave you with this thought because it's one of my favorites. I think every system we work in, healthcare is no exception, has a lot of fractures, silos, and broken pieces to it. But it's really our theory that this idea of human connection can help us really rebuild and reconnect. So if you guys know the Japanese art of kintsugi, is this idea of taking a broken object, gluing it back together with gold, so that it really honors the object's past and it makes it, beautiful in some ways. But we really see that idea of human connection with a supportive structure as a critical piece of how we can heal some of our systems today. So thank you guys, and thank you, Larry, for the invitation. Reactor panel, firing squad. Let's go.
I'm more of a responder or a reactor. But yeah, Christine, thanks. That was really powerful. So I just have an easy question, hopefully. A healthcare system brings you in to work. I'm just thinking about the being side right now. Yeah. Who brings you in and why?
That is such a fascinating question. So to date, it's been what Will Miller calls the organizational rascals. So these are mid-level clinicians mostly, not the C-suite, who bring us in. They'll usually bring in a spark event first, the patients and clinician one. And it creates ripple effects and it creates a lot of interest. And then they end up pitching the leadership. As you can imagine, relationships is not something you really lead with on your performance metric dashboard when you're a CEO, right? So it is often mid-level clinicians, and always from a specialty where relationships feature centered in it. So definitely primary care, if it's family.
That's interesting. That's what one day somebody from the C-suite called us a couple years ago and said, "Who the hell are you people, and who are you working with here? Because we don't know anything about what you're doing." And we're like, we're all with the organizational rascals. I love that. And all these people keep, engaging us because they want change on a relational level. We want to be.
Yep.
And they're like, that's going on here? Sorry, didn't mean to break it to you. But yeah, so that's really interesting.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
And this is a intervention. It's really an experience that addresses the trickiest parts of communication, trust, culture. And it's experiential, so it's not a training. And that's a big difference. Big difference. Yes, sir.
How do you navigate the affect that might be there when you first bring a physician and a patient together, an angry patient, a defensive physician?
We use appreciative inquiry. So we start with best of moments together, and we invite them to talk about something that made a real difference in their health or in their life in some way. And so they start really on a positive note, and because of that, they develop, it's a much easier process of connecting. We were at St. Luke's actually, and we had a patient come in, and he was like wearing the MAGA hat. We're like, oh God, where is this going to go? And honestly, nothing has ever happened bad in any of these events, no matter how afraid we get. We were in Atlanta, Georgia, and this was our first full pilot, by the way. So we were like, oh my God. And we're working at a Ryan White HIV/AIDS clinic in a low-income part of Atlanta, where there's a huge divide between and an active dialogue between patients who at this community are largely young Black gay men, and the healthcare, the clinicians who don't look like that, right? But if any of you have ever worked in HIV care, it's a special breed of really amazing people that go into that part of the field. And so they deeply want to help, but the patients are like, but you don't look like me. And they're like, well, I can't do anything about that. So there was a lot of real tension around it. And we were in a room, so we do some pairs work in the beginning. We watched a young transgender woman, Black woman, be paired with, I would say probably a 55, 60-year-old white physician. And when they were sitting, because they literally would sit knee to knee, They were both like arms, legs, ankles crossed, leaning his back, it was just like as far away as they can. We're like, oh my God, where's this gonna go? And by the end of it, they were both just leaned in, open, you know, hands on knees. It's just giving people an opportunity to talk about something positive. They want to find a connection. It's a very natural component. We do some things early to help people. It's just like when you select patients for a PFAC, you don't want somebody who has just experienced a medical error. They can't come from anything other than that lens. They need some distance between it. So you have to be a little bit smart, but you're not picking and choosing overly so. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just curious about your third conversations when you get the patient with the care provider. Have you ever had with the patient the caregiver, the carer that would often go with the patient?
Yes.
On the visit?
Yes, and at first we were like, so we've had them actually, we have people who have been just the caregivers, and we've had them come as a pair, the patient and the family caregiver. So when you put three in a triad and a dyad, it was very interesting. But long story short, they've added an incredible amount to the conversations for sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.